The cafeteria was a concrete box, loud and stifling. The air hung thick with the smell of stale food, cheap disinfectant, and unwashed bodies. Hard fluorescent lights glared down, making every face look pale and sickly, casting long, stark shadows. 100 men sat hunched over metal trays, their movements mechanical, their gazes fixed in silence. This was the routine. This was the life. This was the suffocating rhythm of Blackwood Penitentiary. Until today, a hulking figure, Big Tony, swaggered through the tables. He wasn't just big, he was a force, a mountain of raw muscle with eyes like chips of ice that missed nothing. Tattoos, dark and menacing, crawled up his neck and arms, signs of countless battles won and territories claimed. His gang, the Vipers, followed close behind, their laughter loud and mocking, a chorus of menace. Every inmate knew to give Big Tony a wide berth, to avert their eyes, to become invisible. Everyone, that is, except one. Old man Elias sat alone at a table near the back, picking slowly at a piece of bread. His hair was thin and white, his face a roadmap of deep wrinkles etched by time and hardship. He looked like a ghost, fading into the gray walls, a man on the edge of forgetting and being forgotten. He didn't look up, didn't seem to notice the oppressive shadow falling over his table, the shift in the room's tense silence. Big Tony stopped directly in front of Elias. A sneer twisted his thick lips, a cruel, confident display of power. "Look what we have here," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stone, carrying easily through the suddenly hushed cafeteria. "Still kicking, old man? Thought they'd have buried you by now." Elias just blinked, his faded eyes finally lifting. They were dull, almost empty, showing no spark of recognition, no flicker of fear. He slowly chewed his bread, his movements deliberate, showing no immediate reaction, no anger, nothing. Just nothing. Big Tony hated that. He hated the old man's quiet, defiance, the way Elias never begged, never flinched, never showed him the respect he demanded. It ate at him, a tiny irritant in his absolute control. Today, he'd had enough. He leaned in close, his massive shadow engulfing Elias, blocking out the harsh lights. The gang members around him chuckled, eager for the show they knew was coming. Tony's breath was hot and foul as he spoke. Then, with a final, contemptuous flourish, he spat. A thick, wet glob landed right on Elias's tray, near his thin, gnarled hand. It glistened under the harsh lights, a stark symbol of ultimate degradation. A collective, sharp gasp went through the cafeteria. Even the usually hardened Vipers went quiet, a ripple of unease moving through their ranks. Spitting on an inmate, especially one as old and seemingly defenseless as Elias, was a profound line. It was an act of pure, unadulterated disrespect and dominance. Every single man waited for Elias to snap, to cry out in shame, to do anything. But Elias didn't flinch, not even a twitch. He just looked at the glistening spit. Then, slowly, deliberately, he looked up at Big Tony. And in those dull, faded eyes, something shifted. A spark, a glint of steel deep within the calm. Big Tony's sneer faltered, just for a second, a fleeting moment of uncertainty. He saw it too. A flicker of something ancient, something dangerous, a depth he couldn't comprehend. Little did Big Tony know that single, crude act of disrespect was about to shatter his unchallenged reign. It was about to unleash a storm he couldn't possibly imagine, a force that had been dormant for decades. An old man, seemingly broken by time and the harsh realities of prison life, was about to teach a brutal, unforgettable lesson in true power. And the entire prison population was about to witness a transformation so shocking, so complete, that it would be talked about for generations within these concrete walls. Stay with me until the very end, because what happened next, truly, turned everything upside down, and you won't believe how this quiet old inmate, spat on and utterly humiliated, brought a ruthless gang leader to his knees, begging for mercy. This isn't just a story about a prison fight or a simple act of revenge. This is a story about the hidden power within us all, the strength that can be forged in the darkest places, and the explosive consequences of truly underestimating the quiet ones. Elias was far more than just an old man with tired eyes. He carried a past, a history of survival and conflict, of secrets and sacrifices that the cold, unforgiving walls of this prison had never witnessed before. A past he had tried desperately to bury, to forget, a past that was now, against his will, about to burst violently into the present. His arrival at Blackwood Penitentiary had been as quiet as a falling leaf. He was just another number, another old-timer, seemingly sent to live out his final, uneventful days. Most inmates, including the guards, dismissed him as harmless. They saw only weakness, a figure ripe for exploitation. Big Tony certainly did. He saw an easy target, a low-risk way to demonstrate his power without effort, a man who had surely forgotten how to fight. But some lessons, once learned, once etched into the very soul, are never truly forgotten. Some fires, once banked down to a mere ember, can still rage hotter and more fiercely than anything known, given the right spark. This act of spitting, this simple, crude gesture, was that spark. It was the moment the forgotten fuse was lit. It was the instant Elias stopped being just another old man and started becoming something else entirely. Something far, far more dangerous. Before we dive deeper into the escalating conflict and the shocking revelations of Elias's true past, I need you to do something for me right now. If you're already hooked, if you're eager to see exactly how this silent old man turns the tables on Blackwood's most feared inmate, then, please, take a second to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support truly helps me bring more incredible true stories like this to life for you. Now, let's get back to Blackwood Penitentiary, where the air was about to get a whole lot thicker with tension, and the true nature of power was about to be redefined. The cafeteria remained in a state of suspended animation. Every eye, every single pair of wary eyes, was fixed on Elias. He still hadn't moved a muscle. The glob of spit on his tray seemed to burn brighter than the harsh fluorescent lights, a symbol of the insult. Big Tony, despite that fleeting moment of doubt, still exuded confidence in his unchallenged power, a cruel triumph in his eyes. He expected Elias to cower, to wipe it away in shame, or maybe even to cry out in impotent rage. He expected a completely broken man, but Elias did none of these things. Slowly, deliberately, his gaze dropped from Tony's face, not to the man, but to the spittle on his tray. His hand, gnarled and thin, yet steady, reached out, not to wipe it, but to pick up his fork. He pushed a piece of potato towards the spit, then carefully passed it, deliberately avoiding touching the mess. He then lifted the fork to his mouth, his movements slow and precise, as if the world around him didn't exist. He ate the potato, his eyes still downcast. It was a profound rejection. A silent, potent act of indifference that, to Big Tony, felt somehow more infuriating, more powerful than any shouted insult or defiant punch could have been. Big Tony's arrogant grin completely vanished. His jaw tightened, a vein throbbing in his temple. He had wanted a volatile reaction, fear, a plea for mercy. He got nothing. Or worse, he got dismissive silence, an implication of his own insignificance. The vipers behind him shifted, their usual easy confidence replaced by a flicker of confusion and unease. The other inmates exchanged quick, nervous glances. This wasn't how it usually went in Blackwood. Big Tony usually crushed spirits with a single glare, a mere gesture. This old man, he just ate his potato, unaffected. Tony stood there for a long, agonizing moment, feeling the unusual silence, the unexpected weight of Elias's absolute non-reaction. It felt less like a capitulation and more like a subtle, unnerving challenge, but one he couldn't quite grasp or retaliate against. "You hear me, old man?" Tony growled, trying desperately to regain control of the volatile situation. "I said, thought they'd buried you." Elias finally looked up again, his gaze unwavering. This time, his eyes weren't dull in the slightest. They were sharp, ancient, like polished stones, glinting with an unexpected intensity. And in their depths, Big Tony saw something that made a cold knot form deep in his stomach. It wasn't hatred, not raw anger. It was recognition, as if Elias had seen men exactly like Tony countless times, before, in countless different settings. as if Tony was just another, predictable, and ultimately unimportant obstacle in a long, storied history. Some men, Elias rasped, his voice a dry whisper that barely carried beyond their immediate table, yet held a surprising weight, are harder to bury than others. Some men simply refuse to stay down. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make an explicit threat. But the words hung in the stale air, chilling and heavy. They spoke of a deep-seated resilience that went far beyond the prison walls, beyond the beatings and the endless years. They spoke of a man who had faced death, perhaps many times, in many forms, and had simply refused to lie down. Tony scoffed, forcing a harsh, dismissive laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes, a desperate attempt to regain his lost composure. "You think you're tough, old-timer. You're a ghost. You're nothing in here." But even as he said it, the conviction wasn't truly there in his voice. That quiet defiance, that unsettling ancient gaze, had planted an insidious seed of doubt, a seed that began to sprout, almost imperceptibly, in the rigid, unforgiving hierarchy of Blackwood. Word spread like wildfire throughout the prison. Big Tony spat on Elias, and the old man didn't even flinch. Elias looked at Tony like he was nothing but dirt under his shoe. Whispers followed Elias as he shuffled through the yard, as he returned to his lonely cell. Inmates who had ignored him for years now stole furtive glances, trying to read the enigma, trying to understand the source of his unsettling calm. Some of the vipers, fiercely loyal to Tony, tried to stare Elias down in the corridors, but the old man met their aggressive gazes with that same unwavering calm. There was no fear in his eyes, only a deep, unsettling stillness that unnerved even the toughest among them. Big Tony felt it acutely, this subtle, insidious shift in the prison's atmosphere. He was used to absolute obedience, to outright terror. Elias's quiet, unyielding strength was more than just an irritant. It was a fundamental challenge to his absolute authority. He needed to crush it, quickly, decisively, and publicly. But how do you crush someone who doesn't seem to care about your power? How do you break a man who truly appears to have nothing left to lose, or so it seemed to Tony's limited understanding? The cafeteria incident was merely the first ripple in a pond that was about to become a raging storm. Little did Big Tony know, Elias was not just a man with nothing left to lose. He was a man who had already lost everything once, who had endured unimaginable trials. And that kind of loss, that kind of profound, transformative experience, leaves behind not a void, but a hardened, unyielding core. A core that, when sufficiently provoked, could unleash a force far beyond what anyone in Blackwood could comprehend. The real game had just begun, a silent war of wills that would fundamentally reshape the prison, and Big Tony was about to discover that some old men carry secrets sharper than any shank and a patience longer than any sentence. His petty humiliation of Elias was not the end of the story. It was merely the prologue to his own spectacular unraveling. The next encounter, everyone knew, wouldn't be so quiet, so easily dismissed. The days that followed were thick with unspoken tension, a palpable unease that settled over Blackwood like a heavy fog. Big Tony, usually loud and boisterous, his confidence a roaring fire, became noticeably quieter, his usual swagger replaced by a brooding intensity. He watched Elias, always watched him, from the yard, from the chow hall, from the corners of his vision. He tried to catch the old man off guard, tried to see a flicker of fear, a telltale sign of weakness. But Elias remained a stone, unmoved, unyielding. He moved through the prison with the same slow, deliberate pace, performing his menial tasks, speaking to no one unless directly addressed. He was an enigma, a walking question mark, and that made him infinitely more dangerous in Tony's eyes than any overtly aggressive rival. Tony's crew, the Vipers, began to feel the subtle shift too. They still followed Tony, still enforced his will, but the easy confidence, the arrogant swagger they usually displayed, had dimmed considerably. When Tony ordered them to rough up a new inmate, the usual ferocity was still there, but the casual, almost joyful ease was gone. They were on edge, waiting for something, though they didn't know what it was, only that it felt inevitable. Elias's silent, unwavering presence had subtly poisoned the atmosphere of absolute control. Tony knew he couldn't let this stand. His reputation, his entire reign, his very identity within the prison depended on crushing any perceived defiance, no matter how quiet. He started small, testing the waters. During yard time, one of the vipers, a young brute named Snake, accidentally tripped Elias, sending him sprawling hard onto the unforgiving concrete. Elias landed heavily, his old bones groaning with the impact. Snake and his friends roared with cruel laughter, expecting a cry, a complaint, anything. But Elias didn't cry out. He didn't even grunt. He simply pushed himself up, slowly, painfully, without uttering a single word. He meticulously brushed the dust off his threadbare clothes, met Snake's sneering gaze with that unsettling calm, and continued on his way, as if nothing had happened. No anger, no fear, just that deep, ancient stillness. Snake's laughter died abruptly in his throat, replaced by a cold shiver. It wasn't satisfying. It was deeply, profoundly unnerving. Next, Tony tried to isolate Elias, to strip away any small comfort he might have. He ordered the kitchen staff, whom he controlled with an iron fist, to deny Elias certain privileges, an extra piece of fruit, a second cup of much-needed coffee. These were small things, but they meant a great deal in the harsh, deprived prison economy. Elias simply ate what he was given, never complaining, never asking for more, never showing a hint of being affected. He seemed completely immune to the petty cruelties, a man without wants or needs. It was like trying to punch a ghost. Each failed attempt to break him only seemed to harden the invisible wall around him, reinforcing his mystique. The other inmates, from every gang and walk of life, began to notice this pattern, this strange, escalating dance between the powerful and the stoic. They saw Tony's frustration grow visibly, his usual easy confidence chipping away, replaced by an increasing agitation. They saw Elias endure every single slight, every attack, every attempt at degradation, with a quiet dignity that was almost infuriating to his tormentors. Whispers began to change, subtly but significantly. No longer were they solely about Tony's brute power, but now a growing number of hushed voices spoke of Elias's strange, unbreakable resilience. "He's got something in him," one veteran inmate muttered to another during work detail, his eyes wide. "Tony can't touch him, not truly." These whispers, light and fleeting as they were pure poison to Tony's absolute authority. He thrived on fear and unchallenged control. Doubt, even the smallest seed of it, was a disease he couldn't afford to let fester. He needed a decisive victory, something public, brutal, and undeniable, something that would completely reassert his dominance and erase the memory of the cafeteria incident forever. He needed to break Elias completely, to shatter him in front of everyone. Big Tony started planning, his mind consumed by this quiet old man. He knew the old man wouldn't fight back in a traditional, brawling way. Elias wasn't a street fighter. Tony had seen enough men like that to recognize a true threat. But Elias's unnerving composure, his lack of fear, hinted at a completely different kind of strength. Strength Tony simply couldn't understand, and therefore couldn't counter with his usual methods. Not yet, anyway. But Elias, in turn, had seen men exactly like Tony, too, many times. In different places, under different banners, from petty thugs to ruthless commanders. He knew their arrogance, their insatiable need for control, their predictable escalation when challenged. He understood the dark, intricate rhythm of their power, and he knew exactly how to disrupt it. He was not just enduring, he was observing. He was waiting, patiently. And little did Big Tony know, with every petty act of cruelty, with every failed attempt to break him, Elias was not getting weaker. He was, in fact, gathering information, mapping the weaknesses in Tony's armor, silently preparing for the precise moment when his own long-dormant power would finally be unleashed. The air in Blackwood was growing colder, heavy with anticipation. The storm was brewing, slowly but surely, and the prison was about to become a stage for a confrontation far more ancient and brutal than anyone could foresee. The quiet old man was about to show them all that sometimes the most dangerous weapons are not found in brute force, but in a past steeped in forgotten, deadly lessons. Big Tony's frustration reached a volatile boiling point. The whispers continued, growing louder, more confident. His own vipers were growing increasingly uneasy, feeling the palpable shift in the prison's unspoken power dynamics. He saw it in their eyes, a hesitant question, a hint of doubt, a crumbling of absolute loyalty. He desperately needed to reassert his dominance, and Elias, the silent old man, was the single, infuriating key. Tony decided to escalate dramatically. This time, he wouldn't just trip Elias or deny him food. He would make an unforgettable example, something that would forever burn away the defiance. The prison library was Elias's only sanctuary, his one small escape. It was a quiet corner where he spent hours, often hunched over tattered old history books, seeking solace in the stories of ancient battles and forgotten empires. It was a place where, by unspoken rule, no one ever truly bothered him. Tony decided to shatter that peace, to desecrate his last refuge. One quiet afternoon, as Elias sat hunched over a worn book, completely absorbed, a group of vipers burst in, their heavy boots echoing ominously on the linoleum floor. They were led by Tony himself, his face a mask of cold fury. The few other inmates in the library quickly gathered their books and shuffled out, sensing the imminent trouble, eager to avoid being caught in the coming storm. Tony marched directly to Elias's table, his massive frame radiating menace. "Still reading your fairy tales, old man?" He sneered, his voice dripping with contempt as he brutally kicked the chair next to Elias. The chair scraped loudly across the floor, a jarring sound in the sudden silence. "Don't you understand? You're nothing here. This is my house, and I make the rules." Elias slowly closed his book. He didn't look up immediately, his movements agonizingly deliberate. His thin, gnarled fingers traced the worn leather cover of the old volume. His face remained perfectly calm, utterly unreadable. This profound, stoic indifference infuriated Tony even more, pushing him further into a red haze of rage. "You don't listen, do you?" Tony growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Without warning, he snatched the book from Elias's hands. It was a thick, ancient-looking text on military strategies, filled with diagrams and cryptic notes. Tony scoffed, a sneer of pure derision. "What's this garbage? You gonna fight me with old scrolls, old fool?" He ripped a page from the book, tearing it with a loud, violent times, RIP asterisk, the sound echoing in the silent room. Elias's head snapped up. For the very first time since their conflict began, a flicker of something other than calm crossed his face. His eyes, usually placid, hardened, transforming into a cold, piercing stare that seemed to look right through Tony, not at him. It was a look of profound, almost ancient disappointment. Not fear, not anger, but a weary, potent condemnation. Tony, mistaking this sudden intensity for weakness, for finally breaking the old man, pushed harder, his adrenaline surging. He ripped another page, then another, letting the torn paper flutter to the floor around Elias like silent snow. "This is what happens when you defy me, old man. I take what you love. I break it into pieces." Elias's gaze remained fixed on Tony, but it wasn't seeing a common prison gang leader anymore. It was seeing something far older, far more primitive, an archetype of arrogance and foolishness he had encountered many times before. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A tiny muscle twitched in his cheek. He looked at the torn pages scattered on the floor, then slowly, deliberately, back at Tony. The air in the library grew incredibly, heavy, charged with an invisible, almost electric force. The vipers, initially enjoying the spectacle, now stood completely frozen, sensing the dramatic, terrifying shift in the atmosphere. This wasn't just an old man getting his book ripped. This was something else entirely, something primal. "You misunderstand," Elias said, his voice still a quiet whisper, but now it was laced with a steely edge, a chilling certainty that cut through the silence like a sharpened blade. "You haven't broken anything important. You've only awakened something you will regret." Tony laughed, a harsh, dismissive, yet slightly uncertain sound. "Awakened what? Your bladder? You pathetic old fool!" He raised his massive hand, fully intending to strike Elias, to deliver the final, crushing blow. But before his hand could descend, Elias moved. It wasn't a sudden, aggressive lunge, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. A slight lean, a barely noticeable tensing of his shoulders, a slight rotation of his ancient frame. It was a movement that spoke volumes of deep, ingrained training, a muscle memory honed over decades of silent practice and brutal application. It was the movement of a predator, coiled and ready, not a victim. Tony hesitated. That brief, almost invisible motion had sent a jolt of primal alarm through him, freezing him for a fraction of a second. He saw it. The Vipers saw it too. The air in the library crackled with raw, untamed energy. Little did they know, this wasn't just Elias defending his cherished book. This was the moment the ancient warrior within him, the man whose past was steeped in far greater conflicts and stakes than a mere prison yard brawl, was fully roused from his long slumber. Tony had not just torn a book, he had torn a veil, he had poked a sleeping dragon. He had called forth a sleeping storm, an unstoppable force, and he was about to face a power that would make all his years of prison dominance seem like child's play, like a petty squabble. Elias's patience had finally run out, and the prison was about to witness a brutal, beautiful demonstration of what true, disciplined power looked like. The library, usually a place of quiet contemplation, was about to become an unexpected battleground for a forgotten legend. The clock was ticking, and Big Tony was catastrophically out of time. Tony's hand hung in the air, frozen in mid-descent. That subtle shift from Elias, that chilling flash in his eyes, had stopped him cold. He'd never seen such controlled intensity from the old man before, but pride and the watchful, expectant eyes of his Vipers wouldn't let him back down, not now. He brought his hand forward, not to strike, but to shove Elias hard in the chest, a desperate attempt to salvage some authority. "Get out of here, old man, before I really lose my temper and end you." As Tony shoved, Elias didn't brace himself or stumble backward. Instead, he absorbed the impact with a fluid, almost invisible movement, like water yielding to a stone. His body seemed to give way just enough, redirecting Tony's considerable force harmlessly. Then, faster than anyone could possibly follow, Elias's gnarled hand shot out. Not a clumsy punch, not a desperate grab. It was a precise, controlled strike. His thin, hard knuckles connected with a specific, vital point on Tony's wrist, a sensitive nerve cluster. A sharp, sickening crack times echoed in the stunned silence, followed by Tony's choked, guttural gasp. His entire arm went limp, his hand dropping the tattered book to the floor. The pain was instant, searing, exploding through his entire limb, but more than that, it was profoundly disorienting. He couldn't feel his fingers, couldn't move his wrist, couldn't even control his arm. It was like his very nervous system had been suddenly zapped, short-circuited. He stumbled back, clutching his injured wrist with his good hand, his face contorted in agony and utter confusion. The Vipers gasped, a collective, audible sound of shock. Their formidable leader, Big Tony, the man who never flinched, who never showed weakness, was clutching his arm, his face pale with sudden, agonizing pain and disbelief. And the old man, Elias, stood perfectly still, his stance now subtly different, more balanced, more ready, like a coiled viper. Elias's movement had been so fast, so efficient, so utterly devoid of wasted energy, that it was almost invisible. There was no wild swing, no clumsy effort. It was the precise, economical movement of a true master. He hadn't fought with brute strength, but with profound knowledge. Knowledge of the body's delicate weak points, of leverage, of impeccable timing. This wasn't a street fight. This was something far more refined, far more dangerous, an ancient art. Tony, stunned and overwhelmed by the sudden, crippling pain, tried to lash out with his other hand, a wild, enraged swing born of desperation. But Elias was already gone, sidestepping with astonishing agility for a man his age. He moved like water, flowing effortlessly around the attack. As Tony missed wildly, Elias's other hand shot out, this time connecting with Tony's elbow joint, a swift, sharp tap, a mere touch that contained devastating force. Tony yelled, a raw, primal roar of pure agony this time. His elbow locked up instantly, blinding pain exploding through his arm. He fell to one knee, cradling both arms now, his eyes wide with disbelief and searing pain, tears streaming down his face. He was effectively disarmed, completely crippled in a matter of seconds, without Elias even raising his voice or throwing a single visible punch. The Vipers stood utterly frozen, their faces a mixture of dawning fear and profound confusion. They had seen Tony in countless brutal fights, had seen him break other men with savage efficiency. But they had never seen him broken. Not like this. Not by a man who moved like a phantom and struck like lightning, leaving no visible mark. Elias wasn't even breathing hard. He just stood there, his ancient gaze fixed calmly on the whimpering fallen gang leader. "You speak of breaking," Elias said, his voice still a calm whisper, but now it held the undeniable weight of granite, the authority of centuries of knowledge. "But you do not understand the true meaning of it. You merely understand crude force." He looked down at the torn pages of his book, then back at Tony, who was whimpering, still trying vainly to stand, his eyes watering from the pain and humiliation. This was not a show of random violence, nor a wild outburst. This was a demonstration, a cold, calculated, and terrifyingly precise lesson in power. Little did Tony and his gang truly know, Elias's movements weren't just a sudden burst of hidden strength. They were the echoes of a forgotten past, a past where such precision and control were matters of life and death, not just prison yard dominance, a past where Elias wasn't merely an old, forgotten man, but a silent, deadly force, a master of a lost art. Tony, on his knees, gritting his teeth in excruciating agony, began to understand, with a chilling clarity. The old man wasn't just tough. He was something else entirely, something ancient, something deadly. The whispers in the prison about Elias's quiet strength would now turn into terrifying legends. The entire hierarchy of Blackwood Penitentiary had just been shattered, not by a bloody, brutal brawl, but by two swift, surgical strikes from an old man who had finally decided to remember who he was. And the full implications of this awakening were about to ripple through every dark corner of the prison, changing everything forever. Tony's reign was irrevocably over, and a new, far more mysterious power had just taken its place, a power no one had even suspected existed. Big Tony, still on his knees, whimpering from the blinding, radiating pain in his shattered arms, looked up at Elias. His eyes, usually, filled with arrogance, cruelty, and unshakable confidence, were now wide with pure, unadulterated terror. He saw not just an old man, but something akin to a primal force of nature, an ancient, implacable power. Elias hadn't even broken a sweat, hadn't a single scratch. His breathing was even, his posture perfect, his gaze unsettlingly serene. The torn pages of the book lay scattered around Tony, grim testament to his monumental miscalculation. The Vipers, meanwhile, stood utterly frozen in shock. They were hard men, seasoned by years of brutal prison violence, but this was different. This wasn't a messy brawl, a clash of brute forces. This was cold, surgical, terrifyingly efficient. Their leader, the man who had instilled fear in everyone, was broken, completely humbled, without a single punch thrown that they could truly see. They saw the naked terror in Tony's eyes, and that fear, that profound sense of helplessness, was deeply contagious. The unspoken, chilling question hung heavy in the air among them. If Elias could do that to Tony, their undisputed king, what unspeakable horrors could he inflict upon them? Elias looked down at Tony, his expression unreadable. "You wanted to break something?" he asked, his voice still quiet, but now it carried an undeniable authority that resonated through the silent, cavernous library. "You wanted to teach a lesson, Big Tony?" He paused, letting the words sink deep into the shattered gang leader's consciousness. "The true lesson is this. Strength is not found in bullying the weak. It is found in precision, in absolute control, and in knowing when, where, and how to strike with devastating efficiency." He then knelt, slowly, deliberately, his movements fluid and graceful, picking up one of the torn pages from the floor. It was a diagram of ancient Roman legion formations, intricate and complex. He looked at it, his gaze distant, as if remembering a time, a place, and a past far away. He held it carefully, almost reverently, like a precious, irreplaceable artifact. One of the Vipers, a burly, scarred man named Gus, finally found his voice, though it was little more than a terrified whisper. "What? What was that, old man? What did you just do?" Elias didn't even look at Gus. He continued to meticulously examine the torn page. "That," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, "was merely a warning. You think you rule this place with your crude fists, with your blunt force. You rule with ignorance, Big Tony. You don't truly know what lies beneath the surface, beneath the unassuming exterior, until it is too late." The commotion, though relatively quiet and controlled, had attracted attention beyond the library walls. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, growing louder. Moments later, two burly prison guards, armed with their batons, appeared in the doorway, drawn by Tony's pained, whimpering cries. They took in the bizarre scene. Big Tony, the feared gang leader, on his knees, clutching his visibly mangled arms, Elias standing calmly and unharmed over him, and the entire Viper gang standing frozen, their faces pale with shock. "What's going on here?" One guard barked, his hand instinctively gripping his baton, his eyes wide with surprise. Tony, trying desperately to regain some semblance of dignity or control, attempted to speak, but only a choked, pained gasp escaped his lips. Elias, however, looked directly at the guard, his gaze steady and clear. "He attacked me," Elias stated, his voice devoid of any emotion, completely level. "I merely defended myself, officer." The guard looked from Tony's clearly injured, crumpled state to Elias's perfectly unharmed, serene one. It was a truly bizarre, unbelievable sight. Tony, the undisputed, violent king of the yard, looked like he'd been hit by a truck, utterly demolished, while Elias looked like he'd just been quietly reading a book. The contrast was stark, undeniable. The guards, though deeply suspicious, knew Tony's long reputation for starting trouble, for his brutal aggression. They also knew Elias was an old, quiet man who kept entirely to himself, a non-entity until now. The full story would be investigated, of course, but the visual evidence was clear and irrefutable. Tony was utterly broken, and Elias was not. They quickly moved to separate them, taking a groaning Tony to the infirmary for urgent medical attention. As they led him away, Tony shot a look of pure, venomous hatred at Elias, but beneath it, deep in his eyes, was an undeniable, chilling look of utter defeat, of absolute terror. Little did the guards, or even the remaining Vipers, fully comprehend the true magnitude of what they had just witnessed within those library walls. This wasn't just a physical confrontation. This was a complete, systematic dismantling of power, a psychological coup that would resonate for years. Elias hadn't just broken Tony's arms, he had utterly broken his spirit, shattered his formidable reputation, and ended his entire tyrannical reign. And this, astonishingly, was only the beginning. The library incident was merely the first public demonstration of Elias's true, terrifying nature. Now, the entire prison population was forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew about power, about weakness, and about the quiet old man who moved like a shadow and struck like a ghost. The true, incredible story of Elias, the man with a forgotten but lethal past, was about to truly unfold, and it would shake Blackwood Penitentiary to its very foundations, redefining its brutal hierarchy forever. The question wasn't if Elias would be challenged again, but how he, the silent king, would handle the profound aftermath of his devastating, unexpected reveal. What an absolutely incredible transformation, right? From a spit-on, ignored old man to the silent, undisputed master of a brutal, unforgiving prison. This story is a powerful, chilling reminder that heroes and villains aren't always what they seem, and that true strength often lies profoundly hidden beneath the most unassuming exteriors. It's a testament to the indomitable resilience of the human spirit and the explosive, often terrifying consequences of truly underestimating someone's past. If Elias's incredible journey and the shocking display of his hidden power captivated you, then you absolutely need to share this video. Think of someone you know who loves stories of hidden strength, dramatic comebacks, and unexpected triumphs. Send this to them right now. And if you haven't already, please smash that like button. It truly helps YouTube know you enjoyed this deep dive into true ancient power. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another gripping narrative, another untold story like this one. I bring you incredible true stories of courage, cunning, and raw human spirit every single week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Finally, I want to hear your thoughts, your reactions. What surprised you most about Elias? Do you think Big Tony ultimately got what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? Your engagement fuels these stories, and I love hearing from every single one of you. Thank you for staying with me until the very end, because as you've seen, the quietest stories often hold the loudest, most profound truths.